Hi everyone, this is Jen again at JFS. I'm in the Boston office, joined by some of my colleagues here. We have a good amount of people, I think, so we're going to go ahead and get started to respect your time, and we also have a lot to talk about today. So please continue putting your exciting fall events and activities in the chat, and we'll use the chat heavily today as you have questions and comments throughout the webinar. So I will kick us off with a brief agenda overview, but first I'm going to let Becky do some quick reminders for webinar housekeeping.
Hello, everybody. It's your favorite webinar housekeeper. I want to let you guys know that folks have been muted upon entry, so if you do want to participate with your audio, you can go ahead and hover your mouse over the WebEx window. You should see a tray of icons at the bottom of the screen. One of them is a microphone icon. You can go ahead and click that to unmute yourself. If you are having trouble unmuting yourself, just chat us and we will sort it out on the back end. Another note, if you are a call-in user, so that means you're calling in using your phone as opposed to connecting online first, it may be difficult to unmute because we won't have your name attached to your call-in user number. So if that's the case, we'll just kind of play a guessing game until we can unmute you. It just takes a few minutes. And then if you want to see the chat box, again, if you hover at the bottom of your window, you'll see that list of icons. One of them is a little like Peanuts-looking bubble from the comic strip, and if you click that, it should pop up the chat window so you can see what folks are saying. And I think that's about it. We do recommend that you connect with video if possible, but of course, if you have low bandwidth, we understand. I think that's it.
Thanks, Becky. So I'll do a quick introduction and overview of the agenda on the next slide. So today is really focused on getting everyone ready and on the same page in advance of our January Student Success Center network meeting. So the meeting on January 29th with the ED session in the morning and the session with the strategic partners in the afternoon will cover a lot. We want to make sure today to get everyone some grounding information and to get us all on the same page. So a lot of today, as you can see from the agenda, we'll be talking about understanding our collective impact as a network and what that means and ways to demonstrate that impact together. So this dovetails nicely from the last webinar, which I'm sure you all remember very clearly. 3 months ago, we talked about the data triangulation method and the 3 forms of data we would collect to approach this challenge and opportunity of understanding our impact together. So we're going to continue on that theme and talk about the collective impact of our network, which includes talking about our network theory of change, and also you'll have a chance to hear about some of our JFF and network grant commitments, as well as what that means for our learning and research agenda. We'll also have a bit of time to highlight one area of that data triangulation method, which is college engagement. So we'll be talking about that with our partner, Research for Action, during the January meeting. We'll also do a brief preview of that today. So just a little warning before we go in, this is a lot of information we have to share with you, a lot of very detailed slides which you'll be receiving afterwards. We hope that you'll engage throughout the chat, ask questions, both today and afterwards. We feel that it's a lot of important information. JFF will start us off, but we also have our network leadership team colleagues who will also share a lot of important information and work that they've been doing. So we ask for your patience with a little more presentation than maybe we usually like, but we feel it's important grounding information to have good conversations in person in Austin at the January meeting. So I will see if Stacy or anyone has anything to add about the introduction, and then we're going to do a quick few business updates before we launch into the meat of the conversation.
Hello, everybody. Stacy Clausen here. Nothing else from me until we move ahead a little bit. Thank you.
Great. All right. So I will do a few business updates appropriately themed around the January meeting, and then I'm going to let Jennifer Miller from New York also give an update in a few minutes. All right. So the first update, we wanted to just do a quick reminder that registration for both the Student Success Center meeting and the post-secondary state network meeting in January those registration, that deadline is this Friday, December 14th. So I know a lot of you have registered already and you're thinking about the teams that you're bringing to both of those meetings. But if you have any questions for us or for your JFF state team, make sure to let us know what you're thinking or if you'll have any delays beyond the registration deadline on Friday. And just a reminder for the center meeting, so that's January 29th, the ED-only session in the morning will start at 9 a.m. The breakfast will be ready at 8 o'clock. And you all have this draft agenda, but just going over some quick timing logistics. So it will be EDs only until 12:15 when your 1 or 2 strategic partners will join us for lunch, and then the 2 afternoon sessions. So both of those sessions will be doing some setup for today with the rest of this webinar. But briefly, the first session is on identifying center impact and some tools and strategies for doing that. So that's the session that will include our provider partner RFA, Research for Action. And then the second conversation will be about the role of our Student Success Center network in the post-secondary ecosystem, and this will be the conversation with the Gates Foundation. So those sessions will take us till about 4:45, 5 o'clock, and then we'll have a reception to which everyone is welcome. So that's the basic overview reminder of the agenda for January 29th. So again, please let us know if you have any questions about who you're bringing as your strategic partner or timing for that day. And we look forward to getting all your registrations in by this Friday. Also related to the January meeting, we wanted to remind everyone that we are doing the semi-annual center updates. So you'll actually hear from your JFF state team soon with that usual center update template, so you can share with us all of the great work that you've been up to over the past 6 months. And we'll do, at JFF, we'll do our usual synthesis of those center updates and share back out so you can see all of the impressive work the network is doing together. All right, and I have one more update, and then I'll just remind everyone to keep an eye out for the Student Success Center Digest. So that will be going out in the next couple weeks before holiday break. So that will have any updates that you didn't hear today. But the last one I will mention today is that some of you have already gotten this request and others will be receiving it shortly. But JFF, our policy services team, will be reaching out to you to schedule a call to discuss some recent research we've been doing on all of the network states in regards to policy indicators. So you'll be hearing from us to help so we can engage you on some of the research that our policy team has been doing around indicators in your state. So keep an eye out for that, or let us know if you have any questions once you get that request. All right, I think we're having a little bit of audio trouble, but just keep letting us know if you're having any challenges hearing, and we'll do our best to adjust. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Miller, who we can unmute, and she's going to give a quick update on center engagement. Oh, there we go.
Thanks, Jen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to say that we, in follow-up from our July meeting and the October meeting that we had with some of our new executive directors, we have put together, Cynthia, Greg, and I, a quick survey to help us understand where folks want to move in terms of engagement with each other as centers and learn a little bit more about one another from the center perspective. So we put together a quick survey that we have, most of you have filled out, so the executive director, so thank you for that. We have a couple more that we're waiting for and to respond, and then what we'll do is put it together in a format that you can use to reference for sort of informal reaching out and network engagement. I just wanted to highlight one area quickly because we have a big agenda today that was terrific to learn from all of you executive directors, and we're looking to also engage center staff as well as we move forward in some of the opportunities for a network activity in terms of peer-to-peer learning. So one of the questions on the survey was how executive directors want to engage with others in the Success Center network. And of the 13 responses we received, the vast majority, 76%, wanted to do more in peer-to-peer learning communities based on topics. So we'll have to look into that a little in the future and include other center staff in that work. And then the other areas of focus that executive directors wanted to focus on were regional calls and meetings, and an informal mentor structure where they would reach out to each other as needed. We have some information in the survey that will facilitate that. And then finally, the idea of having 60% of our respondents wanted to think about learning trips and attending each other's events. So we got some really interesting feedback on that question and several others that we'll provide back to executive directors that they can share with their staff and start to develop along with some of the other activities, ways in which we can further engage in these areas moving forward. So we have a couple more centers that we're waiting to hear back from, and once we do that, we will finalize this and get this information back out to executive directors and that can use with staff to further engagement among centers within the network, at least initially, and then we're going to talk about other things that we're doing moving forward. So thanks, Jen, for that opportunity to do a quick update on the executive director survey.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. If anyone has any questions on that, let us know. They're excited to see the results and where that goes. So that is it for our business update. So we're going to launch into the meat of our agenda. So I'm going to turn it over to Stacy and Naima, who will also be helped out by Sarah Deal. So we can go on to the next slide and get started with this portion.
Hi, everybody. Stacy Clausen here. Good to see some of you on video and the greetings to the rest of you on the phone. Looking forward to talking a little bit more to evolve our conversation we've had over the last 6 to 12 months about how do we understand our impact of the network and the centers and the guided pathways work. So my goal today is to set up conversations that will take place over the next month and into the January meeting so that we can ground ourselves in some additional information that you haven't heard before, and then reminders of what we've done to date. So you can see the goals there. First is to talk about the network theory of change, which has really been kind of a loosely defined theory of change to date, but that we'll be working more together on, and you'll hear about that at the end of our conversation today with the work that Cynthia is going to talk through. We want to create a shared understanding of the responsibilities for the JFF grant with the Gates Foundation, and that's something we have not talked about explicitly. I'm going to share a little bit of information today, which will probably prompt a number of questions, but the goal is at least to set that groundwork so that we can have that conversation with the Gates Foundation in January in Austin. Jen mentioned this impact highlight. We'll talk about the center engagement dashboard and the work RFA is doing, and then some next steps and making plenty of time for questions as we talk through these next few slides. I'm going to ask everybody to allow me to get through this next chunk of slides so that we can get all the information on the table, and then we'll create some space for conversation. Some of this is fairly complex. Some of it many of you have seen before, and some of it is new. So we'll start by grounding us in our network theory of change. So if you could advance a slide, or am I doing that on my own, folks? Oh, good. Thank you. So this isn't new to us. Our approach, or our theory of change, is a networked approach to implementing guided pathways at scale. Through state-level student success centers, will accelerate institutional transformation and increase student completion and help close the equity gap. It's really the same theory of change that you have for your work at the center level with your colleges. and the reach you hope to have and the impact you hope to have with your students on the ground. What's the difference here is the network approach and the scale nationally. But this isn't new. What we're going to do over the next few months is work to align this with the formal network theory of change the theory of change for the centers that you all have seen that Research for Action did on our behalf. So this is important grounding for us because when we talk about our work, if you could advance the next slide, please, we talk about our approach is a network of networks. So we have a network of centers, we have a network of service providers, we have a network of partners in the field, and all these folks are working through the centers. And then you have a network within each of your states of colleges that work toward impact at the student level. So this is important as we work with our partners in the field, and sometimes that's not clear that that's JFF's relationship with you all and the network's relationship with the centers and the colleges. So this is important clarifying. Okay, could please advance? Thank you. So I want to share a little bit about JFF's commitments for our Gates Foundation grant, and some of this will be fairly straightforward. So I welcome any questions at the end for that, for those things that that aren't. So our timeline for the grant is December 2016 through July 2020. So we're about halfway done. So the first year was a planning year. We did a lot of testing of services. We did a lot of conversations with what it takes to be successful as a center and a network, and JFF as our own organization. And then now that we're about halfway through, we're in a place where we've evolved, tried some things out, and as the Gates Foundation talks about, we're in a commitment of a learning process with them. And so this partnership with the Gates Foundation began with the planning, continues with applying our learning, and then we'll advance through the remainder of the grant to understand impact. And that's why this timing for this conversation is so important. We have 5 overarching outcomes that, that describe the results that we hope to get through this work together. And 2020 isn't very far, but you'll see that we hope to be able to extend that learning beyond through gathering data and working with you all. So I'll talk about those 5 outcomes in a few minutes. First, I want to give a little bit of information about the Gates Foundation's strategy, and I am no expert in this, but I want to at least ground us in this so that it sets us up for a conversation in January and helps you all to better understand where JFF and where the network are positioned within the broader Gates Foundation work. So if you could advance the next slide, thank you. So I know the type is a little small here, and that's okay. We'll distribute this afterwards. But I want to walk you through this this map that talks about this network of networks and how the Gates Foundation has, we have a network of networks, but how they have multiple networks in the field that are working together to help create an environment for scale. So bear with me because I'm going to talk through each of these A, B, C, D, and then the items at the bottom that are more supportive. So A is solution networks. And you can see the interaction between A, B, C. So the solution networks, if you think of solution as almost a service area or an idea for organizing services, the Gates Foundation is creating investments in areas that we all have deemed critical for implementation of guided pathways. So for example, 3 of the solutions they are investing in most prominently are digital learning, advising reform, and developmental education reform. So where the label says solutions, that's what that means. Yeah, I'm getting questions about zooming in on the detail. So as Becky indicated in the chat, you can zoom into the slide using the plus or minus, and hopefully that'll be helpful. Feel free to add your questions to the chat, and then we'll pause and go back, and we can review this and discuss anything that's outstanding or you have questions about. So you can see that the approach that the Gates Foundation uses is that there's this iterative exchange of these networks of networks. And so A, B, and C are interact with each other with the goal of creating an ecosystem to help promote institutional change and student and positive student outcomes. So the top one is the solution networks or guided pathways solutions. The bottom is institutional change networks. So you all know that the Gates Foundation works with institutions, and they've been doing work and investing in institutions for years that they feel like are in a place to test out innovation. And so they have a set of institutions that they've been working with, and that's what the institutional change networks includes. Some of you may have heard of the Frontier Set institutions. It's 20-some institutions that are part of that network. So that's their engagement and investment with individual networks. With individual institutions. And then we have the middle, C, implementation networks. Some of you may have heard of the word intermediary or a channel, but this implementation network space in the middle is where JFS and the networks and the centers involves. And so the implementation networks are experts at the intersection of policy and practice and represent the opportunity to create change through these vehicles, through these implementation networks that can take learnings and expertise from the solution networks, can take learning and expertise from the institutional change networks, and try that out, adapt in places that you can see then on the right. Place-based networks can be then the vehicle or the locations for making change at institutions. And so you can see there, it's hard to read because of the color, but there are 9 states listed there, 7 of which are Student Success Center states. There's Oregon mentioned as an additional place-based network because of the Gates Foundation's work in the Pacific Northwest. And then there's a couple of regional places as well. And so the locations represented on the place-based networks are areas that the Gates Foundation is focusing in. So you may have heard that there are references in the field to the Gates Foundation focus states or focus institutions. So that's what that's representing, and they have a number of criteria that they use to decide on that. And we can have a conversation with them in January if there are questions around that. And then it's worth noting at the bottom, E, F, G are enablers and dependent mechanisms to create change and to demonstrate impact. And so common metrics, evaluation and collection, national policy and advocacy, and aligned action. So I included this diagram because it's really important for you to understand where we sit, JFF, the network, and the centers, within the Gates Foundation strategy, because that's the impetus and that's the motivation that the foundation has for investing in the network and the centers. And so we're central to the Gates Foundation post-secondary strategy in that we are the hub or the vehicle to be able to take the learnings and impact in the field and apply that at scale in these place-based networks. So if we go to the next slide, I'm not going to go into detail on that, but this is a slide that you all can read after today. It provides an explanation of each of these areas, similar to what I verbally just described. I want to move on and talk about the outcomes for our grant. But before I do that, I think I will pause and ask if there are any questions about the post-secondary strategy for the Gates Foundation or any of these sections of the diagram. And if you could go back one slide just so we're on that for our discussion, that'd be great. Thank you. So if you haven't seen this before, which most of you probably have not, it's a lot to take in. But I hope you can see their theory of change, really, which is that through the implementation network, based on data-driven approaches to policy and practice and testing innovation in the field, that they hypothesize that impact can create scale in these states and institutions and nationally. Any questions about this? I mean, feel free to put them in the chat or to just jump in. Which part of this is not resonating, or is this enough for today where we can build on this for the next month and the conversations with the Gates Foundation? Jenny, thank you. Do the Student Success Centers exist in the implementation network space? Yes. Yep. And right now, from the Gates Foundation's perspective, the Student Success Center network and the centers are the only implementation network that is in operation. So obviously that's the community college sector. So Gates is also examining partnerships with other intermediaries that would be able to represent, four-year space, et cetera. But those are still, conversations that are taking place. And they're examining the opportunities for working with various organizations in that way. So Elizabeth, thanks for your question. We can get to that, your question about the expectation for the conversation in January at the end of our webinar today. We're going to walk through a little bit about what's happening on that for the ED meeting and the work that Cynthia's been leading with the NLT and others, getting feedback on the network strategy, as well as we're going to talk about the conversation with the Gates Foundation and solicit ideas from you guys. So we'll come back to that around. So what are the list of the place-based networks? Oh, sorry, Mike. So I think I can quickly read that off. So there are 9 states. There are 9 focus states for the Gates Foundation: California, Georgia, Texas, North Carolina, Tennessee, Ohio, Washington, Florida, and New York. 7 of which are in our Student Success Center network. There are a couple of regions that Gates Foundation focuses on, and so that's Chicago and DC. And then they also reference support and the importance of Oregon within their place-based work, because the co-chairs Bill and Melinda live in the Pacific Northwest and want to make sure that they are supporting the success of Oregon as well. So that's why Oregon is listed there kind of separately. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Some of you have actually engaged in your own conversations with the Gates Foundation and may be able to provide some highlights or interpretations of this from those conversations you've had. I welcome that. Please, if you have any, please will you share them. Okay, thank you, and please hang on to your questions if they haven't been addressed, and we'll come back to them. I think this was important and I hope helpful to you all as a foundation for two things. One, for understanding why the Gates Foundation invested in us and where we sit in the foundation's post-secondary strategy. And then secondly, help setting up the conversation that we'll be having in January with them, per Elizabeth's point. We'll talk about that in a minute. So as we move forward into a little bit of discussion about the outcomes for JFF's grant with the Gates Foundation, I want to just remind us about our theory of change, which is that a network approach to implementing guided pathways at scale through the Student Success Center will accelerate transformation and increase student completion. So that networked approach to scale goes all the way from the ecosystem and the network to students on the ground. Okay, if you could please move to the outcome slide, JFF grant outcomes, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so some of these will seem very straightforward. Others you may have questions about, and welcome those in the chat or jump in, because the next slides will talk about the learning agenda. So I think it's worth pausing here to address any questions or to have a discussion about it. So these 5 outcomes relate to JFF's commitment to fulfill our grant, and represents the aspirations for us and the foundation to achieve results in this short time through May 2020. So improve student success, institutional policies and practices, grow and sustain student success centers, inform the Gates Foundation about their own strategy, and then the 5th is accelerating adoption of policy. So I'm going to say a few words because some of the language is pretty straightforward, but there's a lot underneath each of these. So the first one, improve student success. That's through this networked approach or this theory of change. So there's a number in brackets there, 12 to 20%. That is what was predicted at the beginning of this grant back in 2016, based on the work that CCRC had been doing in the field with early guided pathways institutions. And that's in brackets because we are, the first part of our planning process with the Gates Foundation and CCRC involved an analysis of what is an appropriate target for community college completion, when we know that there's not a direct relationship or cause and effect through the network and our approach and the implementation on the ground with students. So what is a reasonable assumption about directional impact? And that's really this question here, and what is involved in this percentage of targeted, for targeted set of community colleges. We will have a lot of time to talk about this. We're at the point in our grant right now where we have the opportunity to look at different ways of providing support and resources for a set of colleges in order to understand how that is affecting students on the ground in a directional or correlational way. And so the how of this work is unknown. We have ideas. We need to engage the rest of the network and you all about those ideas and get your ideas before making decisions about how to test this out. The second one is improve institutional policies and practices. This is a little bit more familiar in that you all are working on building your own capacity. You all are working on helping your colleges implement guided pathways. And you all in some way are using the scale of adoption assessment in order to measure how that is going, really with the intention of understanding institutional transformation. This third one is grow and sustain the student success centers. This is not about how many centers can we add by the time we reach 2020, like trying to get the most centers introduced into the network. This is instead, what is an appropriate pace and volume and capacity or scope for JFF and for the network to be able to continue to grow the network and the number of states, but at the same time balance that with the amount of services and capacity that we all have, and that includes the other centers. So finding that balance is the goal of this grant. So of course, you know, we've introduced about one center over the last 3 years, anticipating potentially right around the corner, Arizona joining us, but they're in the middle of the proposal process right now. So that pace is intentionally slow. Number 4 is inform and refine the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation ecosystem approach. This is really simply, well, the ask is simple. The actual engagement and the reality on the ground isn't quite so simple. But the expectation here is that JFS is going to help provide input to the future growth and evolution of the Gates Foundation strategy. And then number 5 is accelerate the adoption of pathways-friendly policies. This work is a little bit more straightforward in that JFF has a responsibility of working with our partners in the field to create a position about policies for pathways and work with each center to determine if and how you all would like support and whether it's relevant in your state. You know, each state has a very different policy environment. So those are the conversations we're just engaging in right now that Jen mentioned a little while ago. And I think we have Arkansas and Washington as the first couple of conversations, and there are others already scheduled. So we hope to speak with each of the 15 states. And that's an example of what comes under this outcome number 5. So I'm going to pause here and see if anybody has any thoughts or questions. And Erica mentioned a question in the chat, so I'll just bring that up now. Can you clarify how you distinguish between student success and guided pathways? Yes. So from the Gates Foundation's perspective, and that's the expectation they have for us, is student success is about students and student impact. So that would be actually I can go, I'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute, but it's really the KPIs that the foundation uses, which are a version of what most of you are using. And so understanding completion as well as early momentum indicators is one way of measuring impact and understanding student success. Another is, which is really aspirational, which we haven't got into yet, but we will this spring, and that is understanding if and how we can measure closing the equity gap, what that means for the centers, how you do that work, how your colleges do that work. So that's more of a to be determined. Guided pathways, I think when we look at guided pathways and understand impact there, that's about institutional transformation and progress against guided pathways using the scale of adoption assessment. And when Elizabeth asks, when you say KPIs, do you mean the AACC pathways KPIs? So this is, as you know, can be a very complex topic to dig into, the KPIs themselves. The Gates Foundation has higher expectations about what KPIs that JFF would be using, and they have, as you know, incented the field, not just the network, but all states to use the PDP through the National Student Clearinghouse, which includes a broader set of KPIs that represents all students, like fall and spring, et cetera. So that's the reason we are so supportive of the PDP, or the post-secondary data partnership, because we feel it is such a better representation of students. But each state does this in different ways. Of course, Oregon uses the VFA, Elizabeth, right? So however you're doing this, we want to meet you where you are, but make sure that we can all talk through that together and make sure we're aligning as well as we can. Any other questions from folks on the phone that can't get into the chat?
Stacey, this is Jen. It looks like there is a question about if Gates is focused on the center work as it's associated with pathways, because a lot of the centers are trying to make sure their colleges know that the center is more than just guided pathways and about student success broadly. So do you want to touch a little bit on if Gates is focused on the center work as it's associated with guided pathways, or a little bit more general than that?
Thank you, Jen. So one of the ways that the Gates Foundation wants to understand impact is through the scale of adoption assessment, which measures, or let's say tracks, maybe not measures, tracks progress, that self-reported progress on guided pathways. So for them, that's a way to understand institutional transformation, but in no way are they or us assuming that guided pathways is the only vehicle for student success or change in the field or improvement in the ecosystem. So it's one of the reasons why we've received funding to support not only guided pathways services, but also services that help support capacity for the centers and for your colleges, like change leadership or communications. So I think their theory of change, as is ours, is that guided pathways is a framework and a vehicle that can be used to scale change, but that is in no way constraining to only pathways. It is a challenge that we're all having now, I think, and I believe will only continue to get more pointed as we move ahead, because we all know pathways has such momentum in the field, and yet, you know, we don't want to ignore other potential priorities for states or other potential vehicles for change. So I'm thankful to say that although I've been trying to represent, from our experience working with the Gates Foundation, their post-secondary strategy and where we fit into the mix, we will all have the opportunity to talk with the foundation in January about that work, and any questions or challenges that we want to make to the foundation. This will be our opportunity to really bring up these pointed questions, challenge assumptions, offer suggestions, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I want to move forward on the next couple of slides so that we can get to that we can set up the last part of our conversation today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about next steps. So please, thank you for moving to the learning agenda. So actually, I'm going to ask you to go one step further. Thank you. So our learning agenda includes questions about all of these things as represented in the previous discussion about change, about student outcomes, and about scaling in the field, not just guided pathways, but scaling transformation in student success. So you all have seen this slide before. I'm just laying it out here as a grounding for the next part of our conversation that we'll be having over the next 4 to 6 weeks. So this triangulation approach includes student outcomes, institutional transformation, and then center and college engagement. And that's probably the area we've talked least about, and we want to highlight here. So I want to, before I close out, share a couple of next steps, and then I'm going to turn it over to Naima and Sarah Deal to talk about an impact highlight. So to talk about this center and college engagement part of the triangle. So before I close out, I want to share a couple of things that we'll be doing over the next 4 to 6 weeks. So I've spoken with a few executive directors, about a third, to begin to have conversations about understanding impact. What will it look like to measure our directional impact on the ground? If we look at this triangulation model, what does that look like? How do we do that work and understand that impact together? So I have 2/3 of the executive directors and center staff to follow up with, and I'll be doing that throughout the next month by the middle of January, so that we can have those conversations before the Austin meeting. And the intention will be to get input from you all about the how. How do we create a trial, or how do we do some type of work together that can position us to to measure this or understand the impact? And what ideas do you have for your state and what you think that would look like? And it all circles back to our commitments for our grant and the Gates Foundation's strategy. And so we're trying to align all these things now, and it's the right time for that because we're beyond our planning phase, and now we'll be looking to the second half of the grant. The second thing we'll do is we'll prep for the discussion with the Gates Foundation, and we'll do that in two ways. We'll talk in a minute at the end of our conversation today, and then we'll also send out some additional materials for some pre-reads and create a plan for questions, et cetera, for that conversation. And I believe that that's an hour and a half on that first day in the afternoon. So I'll be working with Greg and Jen to plan that session with two people from the Gates Foundation, Christy Hill and Zola Madison. So I think at that point, I will hand it off to Naima, and she and Sarah will talk a little bit about an area we'd like to highlight. So our impact highlight today is the engagement dashboard and toolkit.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to give just a brief introduction, and then I'm going to hand it over to Sarah. So as many of you know, JSF has been working with RFA to design a dashboard and tools to help show the individual center impact and impact across the network. The dashboard will include areas covered in the center theory of change, such as technical assistance to the colleges, influencing policy, and communicating center value. The dashboard is partly informed by the survey that many of you took this fall, so thank you to those who were able to do that. We also have a group of EDs and center staff who are serving as an advisory group to RFA to provide input and feedback on the dashboard as well. RFA will be debuting the dashboard and the related tools at our meeting in Austin, at which point you'll have some time to dig in more and provide some input on the dashboard elements as well. And so today, Sarah Deal from North Carolina is on that advisory group, and she's going to give us an update on the process and progress so far. So Sarah, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thanks, Naima. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Sarah here in North Carolina. So a little bit of background. So Susan Barbetta and I took over working at the Student Success Center starting in July. And one of the things that we were really looking for at the very beginning was a better way to track our activities and to understand our reach across the state. We were interested in seeing easily how our different initiatives and the different cohorts that we have of different initiatives are progressing through. In the first 2 years of the center, we had some summative evaluations that talked about outcomes and events, and those were really useful. But in year 3, we were looking for more formative assessments, and we're really excited and really jumped at the chance to help inform this self-assessment project that RFA has put together. So RFA created a dashboard, like Naima said, and we've seen sort of the initial mock-ups of it. And it really is a great tool to show indicators on each of the essential practice areas of guided pathways. It helps map the activities of our center, or will help map the activities of the center and all of our convenings to the number of institutions that we're able to reach. And in North Carolina, when we have 58 community colleges, I personally think it's difficult sometimes to track which colleges are a part of which initiative, and so this will be very useful. It kind of tracks policy changes and different communication strategies we're using. It tracks sharing of activities and data use. And as Naima mentioned, it tracks technical assistance and any sort of funding that's associated with that. RFA built this rubric that kind of sits behind each of these indicators that I thought was super transparent. You could see really easily what the actions were that fed into this dashboard, so that when you log into the dashboard, you see these really great graphics that kind of show you this at-a-glance snapshot of what's happening with any given initiative. RFA showed a group of states, North Carolina included, the initial mock-up of it, and they were super receptive to our feedback. And I think most of our feedback centered around wanting the dashboard to be more customizable so that each state's context could be taken into account, and we could remove items that the center doesn't control, but more importantly, add things that are really unique to our state. In addition, we provided feedback about tracking the different individual cohorts as they move through. So to say like X number of our institutions are at X place on Essential Practice 1 for guided pathways isn't as useful for us as understanding where our first cohort of guided pathways colleges is compared to our second cohort, be able to track them across. And we have other initiatives going on, such as implementing co-requisite remediation across the whole state. So understanding where the spring pilots are compared to the fall pilots is going to be just incredibly useful. And then RFA was open to separating out the different policy considerations by levels, so institutional policy versus state policy versus national policy. Overall, we were really excited about the tool and the ability to have this sort of at-a-glance view to see the progress as well as the transparent rubric really behind the scenes. We're excited to use the dashboard really for reporting. The graphics are really amazing, and we hope that we'll be able to use it in addition to benchmark with other states to see who we might be able to borrow great ideas from.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that. Did anyone have any questions for me or for Sarah? Okay, I'm going to hand it back over to Stacy, I believe. Oh, when will this be launched? Erica from Michigan just asked. So the plan is that the technical launch will be at the meeting in January. We're trying to avoid saying like it's sort of the final launch of the dashboard because we made sure that there will be some opportunity for those who haven't been able to participate as part of the advisory board. To the development of the tool from the centers will have a chance to provide some input. So there is still going to be opportunities for offering suggestions for improving the tool. And yes, you will get to see it at the meeting in January. Is another one of the questions is will we get to see the dashboard? There will be an opportunity for you all to even kind of play around with it, I think is the plan. So we're making sure that there will be enough internet bandwidth in the room during the meeting. Any other questions?
Yeah, Naima, this is Jen. So while people are thinking, yes, so thanks for adding in. This is the first afternoon session on January 29th. So some folks from RFA will be there to walk through the dashboard, and as Naima said, you'll have a chance to kind of demo it live and provide your feedback and ask questions. This session is also one of the reasons that we suggested you could consider bringing a data or IR-minded person to the meeting as a strategic partner. That would be helpful for you because of this opportunity to kind of see the dashboard and think about some data questions. So if you haven't finished formulating your team for the winter meetings yet, that's something else to consider with who you're inviting. Okay, I'm glad people are excited. We are too.
Okay, Stacy, I think it's back to you.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Sarah, too, for your update. When I had the opportunity to see the kind of, drafty dashboard display, it was really exciting to see all of the information in one place. And even though it's not going to be perfect and customizable for every state, it will be able to represent the work that you guys do because you'll be identifying what information goes in there or what data goes in there. So we're trying to find that balance of customized versus package dashboard. And for those of you who do this work all the time, you already know that's one of the challenges of creating these types of things. But I think we're getting there. And we're also really excited to have the conversation with everybody in January. Okay, so let's move to the next section of the agenda, and that's preparing for the January meeting. And we want to have, this is a two-part conversation. We want to talk about the Student Success Center strategic plan and what's going on in the morning. And we want to talk about we want to loop back to the conversation we'll be having with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in the afternoon. So Cynthia is going to kick us off to talk a little bit about the work that she's been leading on behalf of the network, and I know she's connected with a number of folks, and she has some progress to share on the Student Success Center Network Strategic Plan. Cynthia, are you there? Handing it over to you.
The next slide. So, hello everyone. I sent you an email last night that has the drafted strategic plan, and really what this is an extension of conversations we've been having over the last 9 to 12 months. If you recall, last January we got together and we had the posters on the wall and the little stickers and all, and we were identifying what we wanted out of the network and how we might better organize ourselves so that we could make some of these things move into action. And so we thought it was a great time for this for a couple of reasons. One is that as a network, we've gotten a lot bigger. And as a network, we have learned a lot of lessons. We've built a lot of tools. We've written a lot of reports. And so it's a beautiful time for us to be able to step up and make it a more formalized strategic plan about the way that we can share and help each other. And so could you, Stacy, do you have control of the slide? Could you move to the next slide for me? There you go. So what I sent you was, again, a draft that the three of us have contributed to. And I want you to see it as merely the beginnings. I have a friend who calls it a straw man, just a place, a starter for us to be able to build a plan together, because I hope that at the end of this, it will be a plan that we all own and share and feel that we've had great opportunity to contribute to. And so I just put down in writing what I think we're all doing. I think we can agree that as a network, we want to focus everything that we're doing, all of our services, all the resources, and be really intentional that we're focusing on increasing completion of post-secondary credentials with value in the labor market and for achieving equity. But we're doing this by building out our coherent state-based community college reform. So in a sense, I was just trying to capture what it is that we're all doing, that we could all collectively agree that as a network, we're all aiming in the same direction, though we might have multiple ways that that actually plays out in our state context. And so what I'd like to do is just, I know you have the document, and I hope that you'll have a chance before you come in January to at least look at the strategic plan. But I just wanted to give a highlight of the objectives that we have proposed. And then when we come together in our ED-only meeting in the morning in January, then we can review it together. I hope that you'll have a chance to think about how you would say this differently, what you would edit, what you would add, what you would subtract. So that we can leave that morning session with a good handle on what our strategic plan will look like and what our next steps will be for making that happen. So if you would please advance the slide for me. The draft has 4 objectives, and they should resonate with the things that you've heard already in this meeting that closely align with all the work that we're all doing. So growing and sustaining our network. If you remember July, we talked about how we would really like to see the network grow and mature and become more of an influencer, both in our states and nationally. So this will give us space to talk about that. And then facilitating the spread of evidence-based practices, promoting the adoption of various levels of policy, and then for really lifting up the ways that we are using data to support our work. And so for the way that we were looking at this strategic plan is that this is like a framework, and you might be doing a whole lot of work under one objective and maybe no work at all under another objective, and that's fine. What the strategic plan does is gives us a place to sort of document our collective accomplishments across all of these objectives. So I'm just going to go quickly through each one of them, make sure you understand at least what is drafted, and so that you can begin to think about how you'd like to plug in or what contributions your center has that we could plug in your strategic plan with this overall mega plan that we all share. So if you would please advance the slide for me. Thank you. So on the very first one about growing and sustaining the network, it has these three parts to it. First of all, if we want the network to be a leader in scaling and doing the state-based scaling, then what is it that we need to do? What more do we need to do? Are there presentations that we could be doing? Are there publications? And what other ways could we help the network itself, our collective impact, be more of an influencer? And then the second one is really about how we help each other and how we can collaborate and build out our center's capacity. So whether you're a center that's brand new or one that's been doing it for a long time, there's a lot, if we can be more intentional about the way we help each other. And we talked, Jen talked earlier about a few things like visiting each other, going to each other's events, doing some mentoring and those kinds of things. So other ways that we can help each other have the best centers that we can. And then lastly, around a sustainability plan. So we all have some funds now for a period of time, and the network does as well. But we should begin thinking collectively about what's next and how we're going to sustain that. So this will give us space to talk about that. On the second objective then, this is about helping spread evidence-based practices. Some of you call it guided pathways, some of you do not, but it's still the basic concept of how we are helping our institutions in our states scale up efforts to improve student success. And so when I approached this objective, I thought since there are institutions in all of our states that are at various levels of being ready to scale the innovative practices and guided pathways reform. And so that's what these three levels are. How can we help each other, help our colleges that are at the basic building readiness capacities? How can we help each other with our colleges that are taking on implementing guided pathways at scale, just like the AACC colleges? And then what's next? What about the colleges who say that they're at scale, and they might have some of them scaled, but they still need to do this ongoing evaluation and improving their practices, and what are we going to do to be there for them to help support their work? So that's what Objective 2 is about. If you could move to Objective 3 for me, thank you. Objective 3 is about policy issues. So in Texas, we have a Board of Trustees Institute where we help the trustees think about their role as a board member, as a board of trustees, in helping to enable these kinds of institutional-wide transformation. And I know some of your states have some really great work that you're doing with trustees as well. And so institutional policy is something that I would love for us to share what we're all doing and help each other elevate those practices. But then also in the state and federal level, we go to these JFS policy meetings all the time, and this objective is really about how can we become more intentional about the ways that we are influencing state and federal policy, or what is it that we're learning through our practice that would inform our state and federal policies. And then lastly, Objective 4 is really about data and how we're really committed to using data and disaggregating data so that we can promote conversations about equity and closing achievement gaps. And so the first one is about how we will extensively use data as it relates to pathways And this idea that if some of us want to contribute to some interstate data sets and agree to some common data elements, then this would give us a platform for doing so and for guiding that work. And then lastly, about informing and strengthening the practice and policy reforms through related knowledge development and research. So some of us have very advanced and longer standing attempts at building out the knowledge around our work, and others of us have not. And so this really is just a place for us to be able to share the different kinds of tools that we're building, the different reports that we're writing. We're all using the scale of adoption, so how are you using that, either informing your events or for informing your coaching? So this would be where we could share research and tools together and elevate the ways that we're using our data. So those are 4 objectives. And so what we're going to do in our morning session with EDs only is to talk about, that's okay, go ahead and move forward. What we're going to do is organize some sets of conversations so that we can review the strategic plan together, and then we can break off into groups and have conversations about collaborating on the plan. We can potentially identify some priorities around each of those objectives and what do they mean, and then talk about the possibility of having some subcommittees that could continue the work after the January meeting. So let me stop there and ask Greg if he has any comments he'd also like to make about the morning session.
Me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, Greg, yep.
Just wanted to jump in and say I think that covers just about everything for the morning session. I think it will take quite a bit of our time to get through that, but it'll be a really productive time. And looking forward to having that conversation with all of you.
Okay, so thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. And so for all the EDs, I know it's kind of hard to have a conversation on a webinar and the chat and all, so feel free if you want to say anything about any of that to do so, but also you know that your network leadership team is here for you all. You feel free to reach out to any of us if you want to talk between now and January, or if you have any comments about the way that you'd like to see us run that morning session. We're happy to have any kind of input that you'd like to share. And with that, I just want to take the prerogative to make one invitation to all of you. So you're coming to Austin, and I'm so happy that you are. And we hope that we'll have nice weather for you when you get here, or at least nicer than you have at home. But for those of you who have your travel plans so that you arrive early enough on the 28th, I'd like to invite you to come over to our place. So we are having a meeting with all of our funders, as we do every year, and we talk about the work that we're doing, but we also engage them in conversations as full partners of this work and thought partners around the work. And not all of them were able to come earlier in January, but they said that they would be there at the JFS meeting. And so we're going to do it again in the late afternoon of the 28th. And I think it'd be great if any of the executive directors who wanted to come over and participate in that conversation. We're going to start at 4 o'clock, and I'll send you an invitation. We're going to start at 4 o'clock on the 28th, have a couple hours of conversation, and then go out to dinner together informally to spend time together as EDs and with our funders. So you'll be looking for an email from me about that. And that's it. Stacy, if you want to take it from there.
Thank you. I love your suggestion, Cynthia, of ways that we can start opening up and learning from each other and having even more influence in the field. So this is a great example of that. So Greg is going to talk a little bit about the conversation with the Gates Foundation and how to set that up.
Thanks, Stacy. So here we want to make sure we emphasize that in that afternoon session, when you'll be there with your +1 or +2, that you're going to have the opportunity to further this conversation that we've started today and speak directly with the Gates Foundation. So you can see here on the screen that we will have that opportunity for dialogue about the role of the Student Success Center network throughout the post-secondary ecosystem, including some of the things you've seen here, theory of change and the strategy for growing our community and influence. We also want to create awareness through this session of what the foundation's aiming at, what their aspirations are, and the challenges that exist for understanding the impact of the work that we do collectively as a network. And again, this is one piece of a series of conversations that we're hoping to have between JFF and the centers and the network and the foundation and other funders to talk about how we might demonstrate our impact. And I think it really ties into the strategic plan well. So I'm glad we're having the opportunity to do both on the same day. I will emphasize that we need your questions. So please, either in the chat or if you can send them to Jen by December 21st, we'd appreciate that. I'll also throw out there that if there's something that you'd like to ask and you feel more comfortable sending it to a member of the network leadership team, please feel free to do that as well. We'd be happy to carry that forward for you. So if, unless there are any questions about that, again will be the late afternoon session with the Gates Foundation, and we look forward to seeing all of the questions that you provide.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. This is Jen. I'll just add that, yeah, your questions can definitely be anonymous, or you can, we'll compile a list of them, and feel free to let me know. We don't have to call out everyone who asked the questions. We'll probably end up grouping them and such. So thanks for the good point.
Well, before we head to the end of the meeting today, I just want to add a couple of words of both encouragement and challenge, I guess, about this conversation with the Gates Foundation. So I would say that, and I may say this again in January, that this conversation is a long time coming. And so in reflection, should we have had this conversation with them a while ago? Yeah, I think so. But we were still building what we were doing, and they were also building their post-secondary strategy and figuring out what that looked like, and all these networks and all that stuff on the slide. So even though it could have benefited us to have that a little bit earlier, I think it's also at the same time an excellent time to have it, because we are moving forward. This is a new stage of our work together, and it's an exciting place to be, and the foundation's excited about us. So we can come together, put our heads together, but I'll also challenge you all to help challenge the foundation on their assumptions they're making. And when you hear things in the field and you're not sure what that means or you're concerned about it, this is the opportunity for that conversation. And they, I can tell you by experience, are very interested in having an honest, challenging, if need be, and productive conversation toward our future. And in every conversation we have with them, they talk about their commitment to this work together with the network as a learning process. So it won't be the only time we get together, because we now will be setting up a cadence of conversations with them over the next 6 to 12 months and through the rest of the grant. So that this will be the first of a number of times. But please think seriously and thoughtfully about what you would like us to cover during that time, because it's a rare opportunity. Thank you. I'll turn it back to Jen.
Awesome. So I'm just saying, yeah, feel free to continue chatting in the chat box. Thanks, Cynthia. All right, so on the next slide, we're just going to wrap up here. Thank you to the network leadership team, Greg, Jen, and Cynthia. We appreciate all the information you shared, and just to reiterate their welcome for anyone to reach out to them with questions or suggestions as we lead up to January, which is a short month and a half away. So feel free to reach out to me or your JFF state team if you have questions about any of these January logistics we shared earlier. And just to sort of summarize some of what we talked about today, so really the preparation, if I can put that in quotes, for January would be, one, make sure you read through the network strategic plan document that Cynthia shared, digest your questions and the material there. So that would be for the EDs for the morning session. And then for the afternoon session, as you heard, you'll have a chance to dig more into the college engagement piece of center impact with RFA. So be thinking about that and who you want at in the conversation with you. And then for the last afternoon session with the Gates Foundation, think about your questions. Feel free to send them to me, Jen, or any member of the network leadership team. And again, we'll keep those, we won't say your name when we give the questions to Gates for that session. So be thinking about that in preparation for the Student Success Center meeting on January 29th. You'll also, just to remind everyone of what I said at the beginning, you'll be receiving a request from your JSF state team about the usual center updates that we do, doing that a bit differently this year. And I just want to make sure, that everyone has the next series of webinars or virtual network meetings on their calendars. So you should have received 4 of those, quarters 1 through 4 for 2019, and those are from the email address sscn@jsf.org. So just since this is the last webinar of this year, I want to make sure everyone has those on their calendar. So definitely feel free to reach out to me if you don't see those. So I'll just look to the chat to see if anyone has any lingering questions about what we talked about today. But if anyone from your center or anyone isn't on, we'll be sharing the recording as well, so you can listen back as you think about preparing for January. Any other parting comments or questions? Okay. Yes, thank you for the question. So if any of your strategic partners or +1s or +2s, they are also free to send us questions in anticipation of that session with Gates. So they can either send them in advance, or we'll definitely have plenty of time just for ad hoc questions the day of. So I don't mean to suggest that we won't have time for questions the day of too, but we just want to get a couple in advance so we can prepare that session.
Jen, may I just close by saying I'll be reaching out to those executive directors who I have not had the chance to speak with yet, and we'll be we can set up some time to have a conversation about what the next phase of this work looks like, about understanding impact, and looking forward to those conversations. I'll be in touch.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.